Right, so I thought I'd just do a quick video on lactate threshold 1, lactate threshold 2, VO2 max, and just a bit about training zones. Obviously, for anyone who knows me knows I talk about lactate threshold 1 and lactate threshold 2 a lot within training, because essentially we can talk about training zones, we can talk about FTP, we can talk about where we are. Actually, it all comes back down to what the body's response is in terms of lactate. And that's what we're trying to actually train in a way. So kind of going through the terminology. So on the left-hand side of the graph, I'm just going to try and draw on this at the same time. So on this side, we've got blood lactate. And then across the bottom, which I'll put in a different colour, we've got level of work or intensity. So essentially, the harder we work, the further along we go into these different intensities, so LT1, LT2 to VO2 max, our blood lactate goes up. So this pink line on the graph, you can see it kind of from the left-hand bottom corner, it exponentially goes upwards and then intersects these points at different times. So essentially, as you work harder, as you go over certain zones or certain thresholds, your blood lactate will change, essentially. So when you're under LT1, your body's quite happy, it's quite comfortable, it can actually clear lactate. There's already a resting level of lactate in the blood, and actually sometimes it actually can go down at that point, but that's not by much, but it can start to clear just because the body's getting its blood flow going, and obviously you are starting to work a bit harder. Once you hit LT1, so LT1 being your lactate threshold 1, this is your aerobic threshold. Often we'll refer to this sort of as 75% of FTP, if we're talking about the sort of bike. Roughly, could hold it for sort of 2 to 4 hours, really, depending on how well conditioned the person is. But it also quite closely correlates with our ventilatory threshold 1, which is our first kind of change point in our breathing, basically. We also then have, as you go further up the graph, as the intensity gets higher, you get to LT2, so lactate threshold 2. This is our anaerobic threshold. This is what people commonly would call your FTP, or if with regards to swimming, CSS pace, which is your critical swim speed, or threshold run pace, which also can be looked at sort of threshold heart rates as well, can be sort of around this kind of discussion with regards to what intensity you're at. And then VT2 is the ventilatory threshold 2, so again, where the breathing steps up again. And then going right across to the right-hand side, when you're at the aerobic limit, you've got VO2 max, which is basically the highest rate of oxygen your body can utilise per kilogram of body weight per minute. So that way then we're at the ceiling of how much oxygen we can do. We can get into the system. It's doing everything it can to get it all in, and that's the absolute ceiling. So in this model, we're looking at a 3-zone training model. So under LT1, you're looking at your easy endurance rides. This kind of encompasses zone 1 and zone 2 if you're looking at a 5-zone model. You then have this transition point between zone 2 and zone 3, which is classed as LT1, where the lactate in the blood will start to climb as the intensity goes up. The point of here, it's quite a steady climb, because what happens, the body can still clear it away. So what you'll find is actually at this point, at LT1, so when this lactate kind of crosses over here, you will find that actually your breathing rate starts to go up a little bit. You will start to feel like you're working a bit harder, and as that intensity climbs, so will those feelings as well. So your heart rate will start to climb as well. And this is all in response to an increase in blood lactate, because your body is now trying to utilise that lactate, shuttle it away, and then reconvert it back into fuel. So with that in mind, that threshold is often LT1 is referred to as an arbitrary number. So on the bike, it's like, say, 75% of your FTP. But on different days, that could be different. So if you're feeling good, it could be a little bit higher. It could be up to sort of 78, 80%. if you are not so good, you're a bit fatigued, if you're at the end of a training block, or just you're having an off day, that could be a little bit lower. So it's really important to understand how it feels. So at the point when you're training, if you're doing an LT1 focus session and you're trying to focus around that training zone, without a blood lactate monitor, without lab data and testing, a really simple way to think about it is when your breathing rate changes. So if you go sitting quite comfortably in zone 2, and then you start to push it up a little bit, and you feel your breathing rate start to jump up, and you start to go, I'm starting to have to breathe a bit more. Often you're around the LT1, you're transitioning over that LT1 threshold. So your body's having to start work harder to clear that lactate. So that's what we refer to as ventilatory threshold 1 as well. Between LT1 and LT2, like I say, that lactate will steadily climb as that intensity goes up. But again, it's still a steady state. So the body can match it. So the body can still clear the lactate at the same rate that it is being produced. So it's still in control. We then hit LT2, so our anaerobic threshold or our FTP. And if you carry on getting more intense, this is when we talk about burning matches. After FTP or anaerobic threshold or LT2, again, all kind of interchangeable terms that will be thrown around at different by different people, essentially. There are slight nuances to them, but arbitrarily roughly the same thing, and often referred to as the same thing. But above that, your lactate exponentially rises. So basically the body can't clear enough of it to stop it from accumulating in the blood. And then it gets to the point where it gets to VO2 max and it's absolutely sky high because that's at your aerobic training limit. So bear in mind, LT2 is here. You can see as you go from LT1, the pink line crosses over, it starts to steadily climb, and then it kicks up again towards VO2 max and up to that upper end limit. So previously in sort of science studies, it was always measured as LT1 was 2 millimoles and LT2 was measured as 4 millimoles. A lot of the studies have changed now. Actually, that is very individualized. It's very different from person to person. Some people are higher in terms of thresholds, and it is measured by how their lactate changes. When it is steady state, when it changes on the curve to when it starts to exponentially rise. So it's a little bit more individualized. But again, without lab data, and regular testing in the lab, it's also, you kind of go, okay, well, how does that help me when I'm training for races, especially triathlon, and I'm not thinking about speaking about racing for triathlon. Sorry, my video just paused. So yeah, I'm thinking about racing for triathlon, where we're not going to be, okay, look, what's my blood lactate in the middle of a race? So actually understanding where we are in these training zones, depending on what type of racing you're doing, whether it's sprint distance, Olympic distance, half Ironman, where you are in these zones and helping your training understanding that is really helpful. So essentially we're looking here at a 3-zone model. So, but if you map that onto a 5-zone model, zone 1 and 2 would be under LT1. You transition through LT1 at the top end of zone 2 into zone 3. Zone 3, and at the top of that is LT2. You then transition into zone 4. And then zone 5, which is classed as your anaerobic zone, essentially. But depending on the model you look at, if there's some slight variations in all of them. But essentially, a 3-zone model is much more simple. And essentially, depending on the endurance ride, like if you're going to do a 3-hour endurance ride, well, you then question, well, do I want to do it in zone 1 or zone 2? Well, I think it depends. And this is where it kind of is a bit more nuanced in terms of zooming out, looking at the bigger picture, going, how many hours have I got? The longer you're going, the lower the intensity is. With respect to your physiology. And also similarly, if you know you've got a really hard day the next day, you might go, okay, I'm going to be at sort of bottom end of zone 2 rather than to the top if I know I've got a few days off. So you can have a play with the intensities, especially with the endurance-y stuff, depending on what else is going on in the picture to prevent inducing too much fatigue. Just wanted to kind of touch on that because that can relate to swim, bike and run, like I say. And we want to do a lot of training basically around LT1, around LT2, so a bit below it, a bit on it, and a bit above it. And then in some cases we will push the VO2 max training depending on your physiology. So some people might need to raise the floor. So raise LT1. So we do a lot of work around there. Some people might go, actually, my LT1 and LT2 are quite close together in terms of how far apart they are, in terms of numbers, whatever they are. So actually, they might need to raise the ceiling before they can raise the floor. So then you might do a lot more work pulling up the ceiling and working around the sort of top end, managing fatigue at the same time, so to allow you then to bring up the floor from the bottom. Because bearing in mind, most of our racing, we're all in aerobic training zones. We don't want to be burning matches because we just pay for it later in the racing and end up with run issues, gut issues, bonking, DNFs, etc. So that's just a bit of an overview. I appreciate I've just talked for 10 minutes, just really thoughts out loud and on the fly. So any questions, any thoughts, please don't hesitate to reach out and shout.